Okay. Michael, do you want to kick off?
Sure. You were mentioning there about international law, about whether Scotland or the UK, the rest of the UK could retain nuclear weapons in Scotland after independence. Is there any provisions in international law about who would be responsible for decommissioning? Would it be the both states that come out, or would it be the current state that owns nuclear weapons?
Well, there is a bit of a discussion about that, but as far as I understand it, the majority view seems to be that if they are the weapons of the United Kingdom, and kind of the Westminster-based chunk of that, i.e. not Scotland, is deemed to be the kind of continuity successor state, then the nuclear weapons would belong to them, and then they would be responsible for it. But I've also seen other things about, you know, drawing up lists of totals of assets and, you know, calculating how they should be shared out and deals being done and all that sort of thing. So I think it would be the Westminster Parliament's responsibility if they were retaining the nuclear weapons, ownership of them to then decommission them.
Can I maybe ask, how much of a kind of like a psychological boost would it be for the peace movement if Scotland managed to get rid of Trident? Because as far as I'm aware, I think South Africa had nuclear weapons and did get rid of them.
Yeah.
But I don't know if anyone else has done that since South Africa. Has there been any? There hasn't been any other original nuclear power.
The other countries which had them and got rid of them were some of the former Soviet republics, like I can't remember which ones they were now.
Ukraine,
Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus. Anyway, 3 of them. They got rid of them and gave them back to Russia. You know, so effectively they disarmed as states. But I mean, that's sort of slightly more of a legal parallel, perhaps, you know, to if Scotland gives them back to England, kind of thing. You know, as a parallel to say Ukraine giving them back to Russia. You know, maybe in that way. But I think the psychological boost would be absolutely enormous, you know, and the impact that South Africa giving up its nuclear weapons had and still continues to have, and also the standing that it has globally because of that has just been phenomenal. You know, I don't think it should be underestimated what a difference it would make.
Yeah. Bob?
I think the British government resist any analogy of the British Empire with the Soviet Empire. We should carry this discussion. I just want to pick up something. A couple of weeks ago, I was being told by a friend of mine there's some stuff going around in the internet, conspiracy theories, but there is this whole amazing story about the fact that apparently nobody in London is thinking of the consequences of Scottish independence getting retried. Frankly, I find that incredible that the civil servants are not got to plans. Whatever the politicians in Hammond and people like that say, I think it's the civil service job to draw contingencies. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was saying, a friend of mine was bending my ear about some rumours going around in Cornwall that actually there's some very odd developments, in particular that Fowey Harbour, which is actually a holiday area, Fowey Harbour, has been enlarged to have the capacity to take cruise liners that are now into Fowey Harbour. I just wonder if CND is picking up any of this stuff, because it sounds to me like the British state is getting kind of desperate, and they're looking for somewhere that's probably quite near Plymouth, but sufficiently remote, you know, that they might have sort of stored nuclear weapons somewhere in, I don't know, Bodmin Moor or something. But it's an interesting point, because it seems to me that the debate, as ever, is uneven between Scotland and England. That there's a lot of talk about, well, what happens to jobs at cancelling, who gets employed, who loses jobs and things like that, where would it go? And actually, there's still an enormous level of denial in England about what the implications would be. Nobody wants to have them here, but they think Britain should have it. And I think that there's an interesting thing about actually saying to people in a place like Cornwall, well, it could be next door to you. It's been next door to Glasgow for decades. It could be down your way. Fancy that. I just wondered if you picked up any of this stuff about Fowey.
Yeah, well, just on the parliamentary thing, it's definitely been said to us, or to, you know, CND supporting MPs, you know, by ministers, that there is, it is not being considered, right? Because, you know, they rule it out. But we have heard behind the scenes that although it's not being countenanced formally, nevertheless there will be some looking into what possible options there are, and, you know, considering what might take place in that eventuality. So I think you're probably right that behind the scenes the civil servants will be re-looking at this stuff. Certainly in terms, we've had reports from CND members down in Cornwall precisely about that point that you've made, you know, about the deepening of that harbour. And we actually did ask John Ainsley from Scottish CND about that, because he is pretty expert, and he didn't seem to think that it would be possible, even with the kind of widening of it, to actually locate submarines there. So he was sort of taking a bit of a kind of conservative approach to that possibility. But there's no doubt that when it came to the original list of alternative sites, Falmouth and that area around there was deemed to be one of the possible options. And I know that there have been surveys into where things like the nuclear weapons store would be and what the impact would be on the local community. And apart from the kind of shoreline and the sort of water edge siting, it's been determined that, you know, several villages would have to be eradicated in order to provide for, you know, all the kind of surrounding things that go on, things like the nuclear weapons store security and all that kind of stuff. But I can't, well, it's also, I don't know where the Duchy of Cornwall fits into with all this and what Prince Charles would think about it. But I think it seems really implausible, you know, that it could actually happen there because of all the problems associated with that and any of the other options. So it does drive towards the conclusion that kicking Trident out of Scotland could very probably spell the end of Trident in the rest of Britain as well.
It is actually quite amusing, at one level, to consider it, because actually you're down there in the summer, the place is thronged with home counties types who come down to their second homes to sail the yacht.
Yeah, we
I
destroy
mean, that's
tourism.
from Helensburgh. And I think there might be some interesting social contrasts if they try to put Broadway.
I mean, it's kind of linked to Bob's point. I think the reason Westminster isn't considering it and isn't saying anything is because if they do publicly admit they're considering something, it means they think they have a chance of not winning in 2014. And I think if they do anything like that with anything so controversial, then that's a chink in their armour, and it's a thing the British state has never considered. When any part of their realm has wanted to break away, they don't really have a contingency, because it would imply that they think they could lose. And I think that would be it. And if the general populace of Scotland got the idea that actually Britain thinks they're going to lose, I think that even more people would be voting yes. And I think the tidal wave would definitely go against the British government.
Yeah, that's right.
Sean?
Well, just to carry on from that, if you like, and I'm sure you're aware of the fact that obviously my first minister, because I'm not Scottish, I'm Welsh,
All right.
my first minister, Cameron-Kirby,
Yes.
has made this, I suppose, off the cuff remark, which has not been followed through, I suppose, I don't know, but we picked it up in the latest movement, that he says that we, in the Commonwealth of the Welsh, would welcome the nukes in Milford Haven if Scotland went independent. Now, of course, Cameron-Jones is not a nationalist first minister, so who knows what's going to happen there?
I think he was pretty thoroughly and roundly denounced by everybody, wasn't he?
Indeed.
I think he more or less had to withdraw it.
Yeah. But I mean, at least he's thinking it, and
Yeah, crazy.
us as the general population, of course, would be dead against it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it would destroy all the other jobs at Milford Haven as well, you know, the oil refineries and so on. It would be absolutely crazy.
And the dangers, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
John?
Yeah, bit of a kind of information request on two levels, maybe my ignorance of having rather than directly contributing to the debate. But I think I recall, in the previous Westminster general election, one of the small issues, comparatively speaking, that came up was the commitment to the replacement for Trident, this, that or the other. But I think Clegg and Co being very clear that they wouldn't want any of that, and Cameron being very clear that it's definite, we must have that, etc. It will be in one of those manifestos and what they sort of mean down the line. I assume you will know the status quo now for how far did any of that get. So what is the future plan for the United Kingdom, or whatever form it is determined, and how much investment may or may not be lost in that. And the other thing, possibly for the SNP members, we were talking about this idea of maybe keeping the place for a Scottish Defence Force non-nuclear side. The SNP position on nuclear very clear. On the general Defence Force situation, is that quite straightforward? How large your military would be? How much of investment would be in that? Or is that more of a debate to be had within?
I think there's more debate to be had. I mean, Angus Robertson actually is probably by far the best person to speak to about that. I think there's quite a bit of movement in that, but I do think there's a big issue about there is a hell of a lot of things will be decided if Scotland becomes independent, because you will need the whole population to be represented in these discussions. But I think we could certainly get some more information for you, John, on what the SNP position is. But the SNP won't necessarily be the government in an independent Scotland. There may well be quite a major realignment. But certainly in the terms of the replacement of Trident, I don't know what the implications are financially.
Yeah. The situation with Trident replacement is actually it's quite interesting, because there's, even though Labour and Conservatives are both formally still in favour of replacing Trident on a like-for-like basis, i.e. same 4 subs and all that kind of thing, in actual fact, certainly within the Labour Party, there is a policy review taking place where there is quite a lot of agitation against that, and there's a possibility that they may move away from that position towards what the Liberal Democrat position currently is, which is no like-for-like Trident replacement, i.e. We don't want the same kind of thing, but maybe we should opt for some smaller version, like putting nuclear-tipped cruise missiles on astute submarines, so you have a kind of sort of much lesser form of nuclear weaponry without actually full disarmament. So within the coalition government itself, as you say, you've got 2 different positions sort of stuck together. And I guess as a result of that, and not wanting to bust up the coalition, because it seems to be the one thing that the Lib Dems are sticking to their guns over, or not sticking to their guns, bad metaphor, they decided to put off the decision about replacement until 2016. Originally they were going to take it in 2012. So there is as yet a no decision about whether or not we will replace the Trident system, and that means that there's going to be obviously going to be a general election before that decision. So ideally and quite likely, Trident is going to be a big political issue in the next general election, and hopefully by then we will have shifted enough party policies away from Trident that in 2016 we can have a no vote, so you can kick it out of Scotland, and then there'll be a no vote in the rest of the country.
Can I just amplify on that a bit? It's known as the successor programme to replace the 4 Vanguard SSBNs. So it's not strictly a Trident replacement, it's a replacement for the 4 boats that carry those missiles. I think they're being a bit disingenuous saying no decision has been made, because contracts have been let and work is going on now to work up to replace those 4 boats, and contracts have been let. No contracts have been let in Scotland. It's all with Rolls-Royce in Derby, BE Systems in Barrow, various other places, BE Systems in Ashville, various sites in the south of England and north of England. But the work is definitely going ahead, and they're spending money on this. And I'll take it back to the other thing you said, are civil servants thinking about this? I can only say this anecdotally, so don't put any credence on this. Certainly Royal Navy staffs in main building are worrying about this. And I get the impression the steer they're being given by their lords and masters is, don't accommodate it, nothing will change. So it's pretty much an ostrich head in the sand approach that's been taken in main building. which goes with the politician's view that nothing will change, Scotland will vote no, we'll carry on as is. But it's a monumental waste of money. There's a lot of money being spent on this, and when you actually see those facilities and what they actually provide, it's very hard to justify when we spend on hospitals and bits and pieces like that. And the jobs thing is something I feel for, to be honest, for certain reasons. But I don't see any reason why we can't usefully redeploy those people on the Clyde to other productive methods and jobs. The other thing to point out is it's going to take some time to clean up that site, specifically Coolport. When you see the facilities there, you can't just stop that. You just like lock the doors and turn the lights off and go away. You actually have to spend some time decommissioning that whole hillside that's been hollowed out, all the lifts, all the stuff that takes those warships down to the ships, the sort of boats. So that'll take some time. So it's not, what we have to avoid is scaremongering, saying, right, get rid of Trident, get rid of the Vanguard, send them down to Faslane, send them down to Devonport, Falmouth. Jobs will be lost overnight. That's not strictly true at all. So the SNP needs to counter that with sort of fairly decent arguments. And I'm glad you pointed out about the Ministry of Defence Police, because they make up a fairly large contingent, certainly at Coalport. And they can be usefully deployed to Scotland. They have skills that can be redeployed to other parts of the Scottish Constabulary. Very useful skills. So I shouldn't write this off as jobs will be lost from Scotland. They'll all just head down south straight away. That's not strictly the case.
Thanks, Lee. Any further questions?
Go on. Does your organisation have a policy on the vote in 2014? I mean, are you advising your members in Scotland to vote one way or the other? Well, or are you staying on the
in Scotland, the Scottish CND has a position of supporting the Yes campaign. CND, not in Scotland, doesn't have a position.
Okay.
It's for Scottish people to decide.
Yeah, the last Scottish CND conference got quite a bit of coverage in the Scottish media, and I think were you actually there, Alan? Yeah. So Alan can fill you in, but it was quite significant. I thought. I remember you were talking to the guy Brian Quayle that made a bit of a rabble-rousing speech. Bob?
Observation, just looking at that banner there, saying that we're supporting Yes Scotland. I'm reassured to hear it, incidentally. The point, I think, that comes out of that is that, after a Yes vote in 2014, it won't automatically decide everything. The idea that the British state will just say, oh, that's it then, is, I think, naive. And we'll actually be for 2 years of very protracted discussions, negotiations, call them what you will, where actually all sorts of dirty tricks are happening behind the scenes. And when the British Empire is got back to the wall, it fights dirty. So I think it's important, this discussion tonight, to note that, actually 2014 could be the start of something. And the position of CND in England could actually be a very important thing in terms of networking, so that we don't have a kind of situation where the people in England are encouraged to see people in Scotland as having betrayed them, people in Scotland as seeing people in England. You don't want to play these kind of games. And it's important, I think, for us Scots based in England to be thinking about how do we begin to strategise for what happens after a Yes vote. And it's one aspect of politics of that kind of period. We're very focused on getting Yes vote, which is quite understandable. But there's a kind of politics after the Yes, between Yes and independence, that we need to sort of start thinking through.
Can I ask you just another couple of things? Firstly, you mentioned about India and Pakistan had been the only two nuclear-armed countries that had gone along to this meeting in Mexico, and I know that is a big flashpoint, so I'd be quite interested maybe just to know a little bit more about that, because I thought that was very interesting. And also, I'd read a couple of interviews very recently with Jim Murphy, where he seemed to be saying pretty straightforwardly, we're going for light and Trident. So you seem to be feeling maybe it's not quite as cut and dried as it would appear.
Yeah. Well, with India and Pakistan, although they're nuclear weapon states, they're outside. They've always been outside the NPT framework. You know, they never signed up to it, and so when they got nuclear weapons, they weren't breaking the European Non-Proliferation Treaty. So they're sort of in a somewhat different category to places like Britain and France and States and all that sort of thing. And they definitely have a different approach. So, for example, with the idea of a nuclear weapons convention, when there have been votes in the UN about it, all the nuclear weapons states in the NPT, they've all been opposed to it, and said, we're not going to go down that route. But India and Pakistan have always backed the idea of a nuclear weapons convention. So it seems that they're much more open to the idea that they would give up their own nuclear weapons, if the context was right and if they both gave them up, so they're sort of much more independent operators. With regard to Jim Murphy,
we feel the same.
Well, you're right. As far as I can see, he's sort of, unless he's just very good at putting it over in this way, he seemed absolutely gung-ho and completely pro Trident replacement in all full blazing glory. But the reality is that he is facing a set of different attitudes within his party. We know that Ed Miliband, when he was in the leadership contest, he was one of the two candidates who said that Trident replacement should be reviewed, that we shouldn't automatically go ahead with it, and it should be open to review. And he still has that position. And although formally the party policy is still like for like, they are going through this National Policy Forum process, which is leading to a new manifesto. And recently they were somewhat shaken by the fact that Des Brown, who I think is a compatriot as well, isn't he? He was responsible as Defence Secretary for pushing the first Trident replacement decision through Parliament in 2007. He has now made statements saying that he thinks the situation has changed and Trident no longer meets Britain's security needs. And he's not saying currently scrap Trident, but he is saying that it should be looked at, we should consider other options, it should certainly come off continuous so-called sea deterrence, and wanting to re-look at the whole issue. So even within his own party, Jim Murphy, although representing a strong view of some people, nevertheless there are many different views coming up from quite significant people.
Brian, John?
When Scotland does become independent, if we lease Fars Lane back to the rump UK, or we say get out within 4 years, what are the legal implications of the NPT and who would enforce it type thing? It's one thing saying it's illegal, but who's going to come along and say, we're the nuclear weapons police, what are you doing? No one,
Well, yeah, that's the big problem. Well, it seems to me that they can always find lawyers who will twist it some other way. So, for example, the NPT says that you can't put nuclear weapons in non-nuclear states, but as I mentioned earlier, there are US nuclear weapons in Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium and other places against the wishes of that country. And so, but they say, oh, well, actually, we put them there before the NPT was signed, so it doesn't count. So they would no doubt try and come up with some legal reason why the NPT Articles 1 and 2 don't apply. They can always, in my experience, find their way around any kind of legal or moral argument.
But 2 seconds on that. I'm sure that can be quite true, but there's an obvious precedence for leaving them there, which is the American stuff over Europe. The precedence for moving them, this idea that a non-nuclear state, the actual shifting them over to somewhere else, is that as simple for the lawyers to come up with?
Well, there is this example of what happened with the nukes from places like Ukraine and so on when the Soviet Union broke up. So that would be the sort of counterpart on. They would have to go home.
Yes, but actually very easy arguments for us on both sides.
John?
Yeah. Given the defence reviews that are taking place and the Hammond's decommitment to the size of the UK Defence Force, it would seem that maybe in 10 or 15 years' time, the only thing that will be in the defence realm is in fact 4 nuclear submarines. Because it looks to me as if there is going to be no army, there is certainly going to be no air force, and it looks like, and certainly SNP policy in defence would suggest that there's going to be significantly more people employed in defence in Scotland than at the present time. The redeployment of the 6,000 troops from Germany announced this week, only 600 of them are coming to Scotland. That's a reneging on a pledge that Hammond has already made to Scotland, or to the Scottish Government. So there is no way that a Scottish Government will allow a situation where the defence of our fisheries and our strategic oil and gas interests will be served from the bases in the south. There are no ships in Scotland that defend Scottish interests. They're all based in the south. They must and will be brought back to Faslane, and that's a significant force in its own right. But the way defence is going in the UK, there will be no money for anything, and that's a reality. That's realpolitik, and the Labour Party will inevitably change their mind and try to. They have to.
Yeah, I mean that's why, precisely why, so many senior military figures are speaking out against strike replacement, saying it's militarily useless, it should be scrapped, because they've seen all the tens of thousands of troops being lost, all the other bases and so on being closed as a result of that. You know, it's a simple choice.
Yeah. I mean, if you will support us in independence, we do promise to take Jim Murphy back. We absolutely guarantee we can find somewhere for him.
We're not guaranteeing what we do with it.
My granny's got a spare room in her flat, so he's okay. Fraser.
I'm just going to be quite the submarines, just in what you were just saying about that, is that, for me, is that British sums up Britain and British foreign policy. It's all fur coat and nae knickers. So it looks grand, but actually there's nothing behind. The infrastructure's crumbling, they're dismantling the NHS, but we had a fantastic Olympics.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is it. So, and a wonderful Jubilee, and we've got the royal baby coming up, and then we've got the commemoration of the start of World War I coming up, which was mass carnage caused by European royals. So, yeah, I think you're right, John. It's like, it's all about show, and actually there's nothing behind it. And actually the successful states in Europe don't waste their money on this sort of nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Is anyone wanting to get that? Michael?
Just one last one.
Sorry.
David, you mentioned about the promise to take Jim Murphy back, but too fast that, because there's the MP for Kingston and Chelsea, Kingston and Chelsea is Malcolm Rifkind, and he was a former Secretary of State for Scotland, Edinburgh MP, and he leads, or he spearheads a group called Global Zero.
That's right, yeah, he's turned against nukes as well.
Yeah, so I wonder what CND's position is in Global Zero, and that sort of gradual reduction.
Well,
just one very quick thing is that, following on from the discussion of the alternatives that our UK would have if Scotland were independent, in the summertime, David and Eileen and I were at a meeting with the Royal United Services Institute, the military think tank. It's obviously it's independent, but very closely related to the MOD and to the civil service. And the feeling in that meeting that I got was that they were certainly looking at other options for locations, but it was a scoping exercise to say, well, we've looked at them, but there's no realistic prospect of finding somewhere in England that's suitable. And therefore it was imperative that they thought to make sure there was a no vote. But one of the alternatives which was raised was, to gasps from the Sir Humphrey types in the room, was that the Westminster government would share nuclear weapons with France. And I wonder what's CND's view on that? Against it, how would they go around?
Well, on the first thing, on the question of Global Zero, yeah, Malcolm Rifkind is interesting, and he a bit fits in with the thing, sort of phenomenon I was mentioning at the start, you know, with the Kissingers and Schultz and those types. And Malcolm Ripken actually works together with Des Brown now. They're in this sort of so-called top leaders group, modest chaps, towards nuclear disarmament. So not for scrapping Trident, but for sort of, you know, trying to seriously have some multilateral steps and all that sort of thing. You know, which is, that's fine. You know, I mean, CND isn't going to argue for that sort of thing because people like that argue for it. We're arguing for scrap Trident, no replacement, and a global ban. But, you know, I think if other people, the fact that they have changed their minds and come that far is very good, you know, I mean, and they can influence people, like-minded people who will listen to them and won't listen to CND, you know, so that's good, everyone can come to it, but we're always going to be arguing the maximum position. I mean, with France, yeah, I think that is, it's quite funny how things that used to be like, the kind of thing beyond which you couldn't go, right? Like independent, you know, it had to be a totally British thing. We had to have 4 submarines, we had to have this, we had to have that, we couldn't go below a certain number. And now, in one way or another, all those things are breaking down, you know, and the whole kind of salience and relevance of it is broken down. I mean, like in terms of, like a friend was talking about defence budgets and things like that. One of the first things that the Tories did when they came into office was to stop Trident being a ring-fenced pot of money and put it into the defence, the MOD budget. So the MOD was forced to choose between Trident and other things. I mean, that's a kind of a weird change of attitude which has to be going in the right direction because it's thrown up the whole opportunity cost issue. So not just for things like hospitals and education, but also actually for things like troops and boots and those kinds of things. So the whole thing is changing. And prior to this discussion about, you know, should we share nuclear weapons, should we cite Trident in France or something like that, there's actually recently been an agreement between Britain and France called the Anglo-French Nuclear Agreement about sharing the development of nuclear weapons technology, which they're now doing. In the past, that would have been unheard of. You know, I think it's a measure of how much things have changed in the right direction that they now do things like that.
Can we have the last question now?
Yeah, just it's quite interesting how it fits in with what you're saying. I mean, there's one thing I read recently, a proposal to keep Britain's nuclear, the submarines, the whole thing, actually in America and Virginia. Yeah, I wonder what's your views on that?
Well, I'd like them to go back home. That would be fine.
Is it a kind of feasible proposition politically?
Well, it is one of the things that's been suggested because obviously, you know, the Trident missiles, which give the name to the whole thing, they actually are leased from America anyway. So they come over here, they go back there to be service and all that, and then when they're end of their life, they go back there anyway.
You know, so they're at sea, isn't it? I mean, it's not where the port is, really.
Well, yes,
you know?
no, exactly. So I don't see any reason why not, but then it would just raise the question of, well, has Britain actually got a nuclear thing? No, did we ever have one? You know, so it's been ruled out as sort of, you know, a silly suggestion because it's too far away. But if they really seriously wanted them, why couldn't they have them?
So just on that point, question is, they're from France and they've never heard of this treaty.
The Tutatis Treaty. It was about 2 years ago, and it was cooperation between Val-Duc, the nuclear facilities in Val-Duc, and Aldermaston in Britain, where we have the development of our warheads. So it's to cooperate on simulating the testing of nuclear warheads. If you have an email, if you have an email address, I can send you something. Okay.
They hadn't heard of it.
Okay.
That's it.
Ah, right.
Secret.
Yeah.
Censorship in France.
We're nuclear partners.
Okay, I think we've got one last person. Russell.
Just a very small one. You've mentioned about
Sorry, hold on a sec. Just one meeting, please.
You've mentioned about the UK coastline not being suitable elsewhere for very many options to rehouse Trident. Does that include Northern Ireland?
Well, there was, when they had the Polaris in the 1960s, there was a base or a place in Northern Ireland which was deemed to be suitable. I can't remember the name of it now, but obviously because of the situation in the north of Ireland, in terms of potential Irish unification and that sort of thing, and the Good Friday Agreement, I think it's off the agenda politically, totally, as far as I understand.
Okay. Well, look, thank you very much, folks. If you could just... Okay, yeah, apologies, we can fit your title. Great, great, okay. Alan, have you got your camera and stuff? Great, okay. That's good.